ILTV Plus, your news from Israel and more 24/7. Start your free trial today. Subscribe at ILTV.tv and watch from any device. All right, now Israel accused of another airstrike in Syria this week, the third in a week and a half. And if truly the work of the IDF, this would be one of the hundreds of such attacks in the past few years. Israel in the past even admitting as much. So here's the question, though. If Israel is so consistently attacking Syria, why doesn't Syria ever hit back? Is it because Syria fears Israeli repercussions, even while backed by Russia? Is it because Putin pressures Assad to stand down? Or maybe, is it that Israel, Russia, and Syrian interests aren't that far apart after all? Joining me to discuss is Dr. Fadi Ismail, research fellow at the Institute for Counterterrorism at Reichman University and former senior staff member at the United States Congress. It's great to have you back with us.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
All right, so first of all, tell me a little bit about this latest strike and what sets it apart or unique from previous strikes.
Well, first of all, the rhythm, the operational rhythm between what was reported and things that were not reported, both the airstrikes and other types of operations. Also elements of how the operations were or were not coordinated with major powers in the region, which are Russia, of course, and the United States and others. It seemed to have much more leeway than before. It seems to have allowed additional types of license to do things, and if you notice, not very long ago we met with Putin. I mean, there's some new understanding. Yeah. And
Syria is a consistent discussion topic amongst.
Has to be. There's
Israel-Russia discussions, of course.
So in that sense, there are some tactical and operational signatures that are a bit different towards a more leeway, deeper penetration into the Syrian arena, should I say.
So does this signify a joint effort, you could say, to some degree or any degree of Israel, Russia, and Syrian forces to oust Iran?
I wouldn't say joint effort as such, unless you consider intelligence transfer. But the Russians can very easily stop the Israeli Air Force from flying there.
Right.
They have one of the best air defense systems in the world, the S-400 there, and they have some of the best, probably the best operators of those systems there. I mean, they can do it. They can lock the skies for the Israeli Air Force. The very fact they're not locking the skies is everything. It's a difference between 0 and 1. So they don't necessarily have to do much more than that to say, again, you can call it a form of collaboration if you want, more of a coordination.
Maybe like a tacit approval?
It's screaming. It's not even tacit. It's like you can go do anything you want. And look, but I want to say something else about that. For people inside the analyst community, the idea that there is a shared interest in that regard, shared to the Syrians and the Israelis, as well as the Russians, vis-a-vis the Iranian presence in Syria, is nothing new. I mean, we've been talking about this right from the start of the war, as the Iranian penetration into Syria increased and increased. And I promise you, while the Syrians are very happy to receive Iranian assistance, because that's part of what kept them in power, it kept the regime in power, they are very uncomfortable with the overtake of Syria by Iranian military entities. I mean, there are entire neighborhoods in Damascus today that are populated by Iranians. There are entire new projects that have nothing but Iranians in them. People don't realize the level of penetration. The settlement, basically, it's a settlement movement of Iranian Shiites inside Syria, and it's a very big one. And the Syrian, so the regime is sort of stays there, but it is very clear that they are under some kind of a bear hug. Now, the future one will be also between Syria and Russia.
Right.
I mean, also the Syrian regime is not very happy with the Russian control over him in the way it's. I mean, we will have
one enemy at a time.
Yeah. So this is one thorn that they would like to see partially pulled out at the time. There's also, of course, a very large economic dimension to that. The Iranians are forcing their companies on all the rehabilitation process, which means hundreds of billions of dollars, while I'm not sure that the Syrians want them to rebuild the country.
So could the facts on the ground that you're describing as they are lead to a new Middle East where Israel and Syria align in the future, say, against Russia, or or are Israeli and Syrian,
These
is
things
an
don't.
Israeli-Syrian alliance just super far-fetched?
Look, for our friends and colleagues who will live in those dark alleys of the very secret deals and behind the doors and stuff, to them it's never black and white. They will work per situation. So in a certain situation, and this is something that surprises people who are not in that world, in one situation, two sides can be very much allied, and then 5 minutes later, or at the same time, 20 kilometers away, they're actually completely against each other. So
those are not mutually exclusive issues.
No, they are trivial to people who actually deal with the analysis. This is basically a trivial point that it depends on the location, the time, the situation, and the shifting interests of every party. It's a mess. It is you cannot take one principle and say, okay, that organizes all of it. The only principle that organizes it is, it depends. That's what I found so far.
Right. Leaving us with big questions, but excellent answers. Fadi Ismail, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.